right, can y'all hear me? Okay, awesome. Thank you guys for joining us. Thank you, Dr. McCormick, and the whole team, everyone working so hard to put this all together. So the panel today is called The Politics of Visuality, Surveillance, and the Colonial Gaze. I'm going to do like a quick intro of each panelist, but you can find more detailed info in the program book. So we have Alexis Davis from TCU, who's going to present on Black Instinct, the survival kit for the Black and marginalized at a predominantly white institution. And then Jacora Johnson, Pamela will go next. Also from TCU, who's going to present on panoptic fear, vulnerable individuals' response to the watchful eye of the surveillance state. And then Jacora Johnson from TCU, who will present on disrespectability and deviance, revisualizing the Black queer archive. And then Ahmed Gala Lopez from UCLA. Okay. The Prison World Through Freedom Papers in 21st Century Kenya. Again, you can find more detailed info on the program book, but I'm gonna give it away to Alexis.
Sorry, we were having a little debate over here, a little tussle about whether we were going to sit or stand, and I lost. So I will be standing. So, hey y'all, my name is Alexis Davis. I'm a senior writing major with a minor in comparative race and ethnic studies here at TCU. And my autoethnographic archive is titled Black Instinct, the survival kit for the Black and marginalized at a predominantly white institution, which focuses on my intersectional experience at TCU and studying abroad through the lens of Black women's rhetoric. Oh, hold up, wait a minute. Wait, we gotta look at the transition look.
Okay.
Ooh.
There we go, okay.
Anyway, please scan the QR code to access my zine titled If a Black Girl Could Write, which is a part of my zine collection that will be further discussed during this presentation. If you're unable to scan, there should be physical QR codes to access this zine on your tables. So it's like the little small, right there. You see right there? Yes, thank you for those that are holding it up. So, but it's just like Alexis Davis on it, so. So to begin, I would like to tell you all a story. In fall of 2022, I studied abroad in Florence, Italy, conducting my research Black Instinct that questioned the preparedness of Black women college students at predominantly white institutions that studied abroad, along with the rhetoric among Black women as a muted group in academia, nationally, and transnationally. During my time abroad, I faced many challenges that interrogated my identity as a Black American woman in this global society. I questioned how race, ethnicity, nationality, and gender has equated to the absence of my transnational identity, and how the mutation of Black women affects our discourse and experience in the academy. My Black travel narratives were documented as video commentary, poetry, and journal entries. I examined these narratives through the theoretical frameworks of muted group theory and Black women's rhetoric to understand how memory influences Black women's historical identity and storytelling while navigating PWIs. So before we get into the content, we must first look at the construction of the archive. So what is a zine? Zines, which is abbreviated for magazine and fanzine, is a self-made publication that has historically been associated to social and subcultural movements that provides a channel for marginalized groups to document their experiences. Zines encourage literary autonomy and enable scholars to question how systems play a part in the power dynamics of marginalized and dominant groups. My archive focuses on the use of zines as a rhetorical device that serves and protects Black women's identities, bodies, and language while studying abroad. So, the first zine of the collection is The Irony of a Black Academic, which provides historical relevance while connecting to the realities of Black academics and PWIs. This begins with Orlando Patterson's description of social death as a condition in which a person or people are treated socially as dead. As a component of social death, natal alienation occurs when individuals and communities are disconnected from their birthright to memory and culture. By examining the generational disconnect that is a result of amputating people from their culture and traditions, Patterson explains that slaves are a genealogical isolate, or in other words, when their ancestries are disconnected. Because Black Americans' denial of birth underlines the historical significance in understanding how descendants of enslaved Africans continue to be mistreated and discriminated against as a result of Black Americans not being completely accepted into the U.S. To further understand the condition, we look at the polarity of the Black-white binary, which demonstrates the racial linear history between Black and white Americans in the U.S. It is in my conviction that the Black-white binary models two fixed points of whiteness, those that retain birthrights, uphold whiteness, and are not susceptible to erasure, and the fixed point of Blackness, those that lack birthright, memory, and any claim to historical identity. In short, Blackness is associated with death, and there is a collective movement that actively rejects Blackness and Black Americans in order to strive for whiteness. As a world power, American culture is held to the highest regard in the global community, which often neglects the complex histories and racial hierarchy between the US and Black Americans. The dominant narrative of American culture is told by the fixed points and the peak of racial hierarchy of white Americans. From the external lens of the US, this paradigm is upheld by the global community of what white Americans deem to be acceptable in society. This often excludes and appropriates Black American culture and traditions by white Americans and then is adopted by the global society, leaving Black American culture and traditions to be both invisible, hypervisible, and rejected by the global community. As we understand the domestic and international position of Black Americans, it is important to address how language plays a significant role as a conduit between Black American memory and the academy. The second zine of the collection is If a Black Girl Could Write, which discusses the mutation and storytelling of Black women in the academy and in media. This zine examines intersectional identities as part of a socially dead community, being Black, and as part of This zine examines intersectional identities as part of a socially dead community, being Black, and as part of a muted group, being women. Muted group theory is the exclusion of marginalized voice, language, and experiences that are often overlooked in discourse that is influenced by dominant voices in society. In Robin Boylorn's book, Sweetwater, Black Women in Narratives of Resilience, her formula to apply intersectionality and muted group theory to the experiences of Black women in the literary context establishes the foundation of my work to apply muted group theory to the experiences of Black women in the academy through a rhetorical context using zines. By examining Black women through the condition of social death and mutation, I was inspired by Ronisha Browdy's work, Rhetorical Spirits, Spirituality as Rhetorical Device in New Age Womanist of Color Text, where she identifies spirituality as a rhetorical tool to understand how Audre Lorde describes the erotic as spiritual and as a bond of women relationships that centers as power originating and hidden in articulate feelings. I explored Lorde's erotic and Damaris Hill's use of breath in her book, Breath Better Spent, Living Black Girlhood, as a language that manifests in scholarly work through Black girlhood studies, specifically how memory influences Black women's storytelling and how natal alienation plays a part in how Black women storytell. The existence of Black women's rhetoric recognizes the historical disconnection that required Black women to create and reshape how we storytell and maintain memory. When we account for Black girlhood, which understands the experiences, expressions, and memory of Black women in their youth, we underline how natal alienation plays a part in how we communicate, storytell, and maintain historical identity generationally. This includes individual and communal rhetoric and language. While Black movements are often tied to physical relocation, I recognize that Black mobility plays a vital role in cultural relocation. In Ronisha Browdy's work, Black Women Rhetorics, a conversation starter for naming and claiming a field of study, she states that Black women negotiate, navigate, and use their unique positionalities to make and distribute knowledge across diverse spaces and audiences. As a Black woman navigating through PWIs and studying abroad, I developed a digital platform used to archive a collection of zines that is made to acknowledge Black women's shared experiences as cultural straddlers, which are when people strategically navigate across cultural spaces, and using linguistic shifts like code switching in Black English, in which we oppose the parameters of traditional research and to understand the significance and the dynamics that play in part in Black movements that can prepare Black women for success in predominantly white and exclusive spaces. The third zine of the collection is The Demise of a Black Traveler, which depicts my study abroad experience. Although Black American travel writing often centers on stories of forced movements or focus on Black American traveling post-undergraduate, there are few resources, stories, and content about Black American women studying abroad. Black American representation is important because it rectifies the belief that there are few Black travelers compared to white counterparts. The thought of my experiences and language to the erasure of Black women's memory and historical identity encouraged me to catalog my study abroad experience using Black travel narratives. The link between travel writing and the Black American experience is often not explored and is pigeonholed to specific parameters of what can be visible in a travel writing genre. I begin the zine with Victor H. Green's travel guide, well known as the Negro Motorist Green Book, which has been used and catered to Black Americans traveling throughout the US and providing resources about accommodations, businesses from the 1930s to the 1960s. While Black Americans were not unfamiliar with movement throughout the US, this guide became a rhetorical tool used to both serve and protect Black bodies. In Isabel Callis's work, An Invisible Kaleidoscope Genre, Black Travel Writing, she acknowledges Dorothy Lazar's observation that Black travel writers become both the narrator and subject in their writing through the historical and intersectional lens of Black American experience. As a Black travel writer, my perceptions of the institutions I inhabited must take into consideration my intersectional identities, making me both the narrator and subject. In this scene, I discussed my involvement in removal of the TCU Global Scholars Program, my lack of preparedness to study abroad, and the challenges I faced studying abroad, along with the healing process upon my return to the States. The fourth zine of the collection is Mama's Tongue, which unveils my findings. The challenges I faced studying abroad shifted my perception of self to the global community. I discovered that when I was in the US, being Black American sits at the forefront of my mind because of the historical relevance of race and ethnicity. Because the historical relevance of race and ethnicity informs how I move throughout these spaces. I learned that as a cultural straddler in predominantly white and academic environments, rhetoric and language plays a significant role in how I communicate with community and the intercommunal discourse between Black women within academia. Studying abroad has the propensity to amplify these issues that are often suppressed, which conjured my understanding of self-censorship and mutation in language. Consequently, I recognized I was not prepared to study abroad because of the severed historical identity that prevents Black Americans from knowing, understanding, and exploring their transnational identity, including within the Black diaspora. This disconnection not only appeared in the Black travel narratives, but during the zine-making process. As I was structuring my research, I discovered that although the Academy praised the importance of communal research, the Academy's opposition to the parameters of research contradicts the purpose of communal work. I was often discouraged from creating zines as a primary device to display my process and findings. Instead, I was told that creating zines would be the product of writing my research. This countered the purpose of housing my findings in the zines because the archive would clearly demonstrate how the nonlinear research process is justified. By creating a website platform, I would focus on the accessibility of the archive so that it expands to contribute to community-based knowledge and language. Overall, my research uncovered my institution's inability to adequately prepare Black women for navigating predominantly white institutions, including study abroad processes and environments that are culturally exclusive. I also identified a rhetorical deficiency in resources that overlooked Black women's needs and upholding barriers that prevent them from accessing opportunities, along with opposing nonlinear and community-based research. In short, Black women's rhetorical expressions challenge the norms of traditional research to make space and provide opportunities for Black women to navigate predominantly white spaces. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Pamela Herrera. I am a senior English major here at TCU, and I study digital surveillance, immigration, carcerality, and their impacts on self-determination and bodily autonomy. Today I will be presenting my project, Panoptic Fear, Vulnerable Individuals' Response to the Watchful Eye of the Surveillance State. Before moving into the heart of the presentation, let's get into a few technical terms to better understand the title of this project and the nature of this study. First and foremost, vulnerable individuals, a term that refers to persons with very little legal protections that render their value in society virtually non-existent. This definition includes undocumented immigrants, those with absolutely no status, and anyone with a history of state detainment. And these are people with social conditions that make them more subject to falling into the hands of local and federal police for any kind of legal and social misstep. Next, we have the entire title of this project, Panoptic Fear, which refers to the fear of being watched by unofficial policing forces, such as co-workers, classmates, or neighbors, to name a few examples, who also possess the ability to call upon state forces to discipline dissidents of the law. This self-formulated theory draws from the concept of the panopticon, which is an idea conceptualized by English philosopher Jeremy Bentham, who proposed the ideal mode of control and behavioral regulation as a watchtower in the center of circular prisons to create an illusion of constant vigilance among prisoners, forcing them to be constantly obedient whether they are being watched or not. Years later, much later, the French philosopher Michel Foucault appropriated this concept and theorized that the watchtower served as a metaphor for how governments attempt to implement social control. I reconfigured Foucault's appropriations to articulate how vulnerable individuals embody the fear they experience by the illusion of perpetual surveillance. Now let's move on to social context. A little bit of social context. In the year 2016 was a transitional period in U.S. American political landscape. The incumbency of the nation's first Black president was coming to an end, and 1 year later, the Grand Old Party, or the GOP, dominated all sectors of the White House for the first time since 2005. At the same time, there was a rhetorical shift in conversations about the southern border and the parameters of legal citizenship. Additionally, border malleability and immigration enforcement were at the center of presidential debates and bipartisan campaigns. This year is also largely associated with former President Donald Trump, during which he came into the public eye as a politician rather than the magnate and media personality he was known as before launching his political career. Trump's primary focus during his campaign and incumbency was that of stricter immigration laws at the federal and local level, citing undocumented but especially Latino immigrants as public safety threats. The language he used for these communities in his speeches
rapists, drug traffickers, criminals, to name a few, and other public statements trickled down and emboldened certain groups to speak out against immigration into the U.S. As a result, non-citizens began to distrust state apparatuses even further, including their local police, as the prevalence of anti-immigrant settlements translated into actual detainment and deportations. This fear led to a self-imposed social isolation among undocumented people as a way to keep out from under ICE's radar. However, this proved increasingly difficult as their methods of survival were continuously and forcibly changed as the advent of surveillance techniques continued to grow and are still being innovated to this day. To further explore this, I conducted a qualitative analysis of a Latino community whose members are located in various areas within the Dallas-Fort Worth or DFW Metroplex. Their communications methods shifted after local immigration patrolling became more prevalent in their area. This ethnography investigates the ways in which the community is able to obtain, or in some cases lose, agency as determined by their communication medium and the shift in the language they used among each other. Through close readings of dialogues taking place in 2 different messaging apps, I analyzed how the group chat's content informed strategies of movement. The community consisted of 2 subgroups, the high schoolers and the elders, both undocumented and documented citizens, whose identities are not disclosed for privacy and safety concerns. The 2 subgroups communicated among their respective age groupings using 2 different messaging apps. The high schoolers used Kick Messenger, while the elders used WhatsApp Messenger. And so, after the 2016 election, when local immigration enforcement intensified in the Metroplex, as well as other areas across the country, casual use of these apps turned into a tool through which community members warned each other of the presence of Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, agents. Patrol vehicles shared Know Your Rights resources and the contact information of pro bono immigration lawyers. Undocumented members of the groups came to fear run-ins with ICE to a greater degree than when immigration forces were not as omnipresent near their homes. As a result of these more intense and frequent sightings of immigration forces, the 2 subgroups within the studied DFW community changed their modes of communication as they used messaging apps that previously served a casual purpose to now begin strategizing modes of protection against the state. Simply put, there was a disruption in the day-to-day of the community at the hands of state terror. So the shifts that happened in this community were centralized in their digital communication. The 2 subgroups saw changes in their group chat content to different degrees. On the right, we see the high schoolers, which is composed of students, teachers, and staff who use Kick Messenger, which around 2016 was still very popular. And there was no group chat that existed before 2016. A few of the shifts that occurred in this new existing group chat were not from group chat to group chat, instead they were verbal, now into a digital medium. For example, whereas before students, teachers, and staff would have verbal conversations about changes in immigration laws and the new presidency, they then turned to this Kick group chat to share resources among teachers and students, including pro bono lawyers and Know Your Rights organizations that could help them in case of their detainment or possible deportation. Whereas before teachers would support students with resources for themselves and family just through word of mouth, they then began using the Kick group chat to warn each other of ICE bodies near the school and other residential areas that they knew their students would frequent. Whereas before students discussed personal immigration cases and situations among each other, they then began to use the group chat as a tool to share successes and struggles with their families and their own immigration cases. In the case of the elders, who were parents, grandparents, caretakers, aunts, and uncles of the high schoolers, though not all involved in the same nuclear family, yet still within DFW, they had different group chats for different family members and group chats for family members within the US, within their home countries, and it was just that. There was no coworker group chats, no teacher group chats, anything of that nature. So the group chats for them began with the novelty of WhatsApp, and as family members began to move away from their home countries. A few of the shifts that they experienced were checking in with long-distance family members about lives, children, and careers, to family members in their countries of origin checking in with undocumented individuals in the US, more specifically in DFW. Whereas before they planned family gatherings and periodically shared milestone moments through picture sharing or anything of that nature, they now shared lawyer information and anecdotes about other immigration cases occurring within and other communities. Whereas before they were able to create a space to remain connected by digitally archiving family memories, They were now strategizing plans of action with family members abroad in case of their or other family members' deportations. So these group chats happened in the context of 2016 to 2017. When checking in with these communities from 2021 to 2023, I found that the elder group chat remained highly alive and communicative to this day. The users of this group continue to share resources with each other, though with less frequency than when the group chats were originally reconfigured as tools for resource sharing. The fear that dominated the elders group chats continues to inform their communication, as they still share immigrant lawyer information and regularly discuss the formulation of new immigration policies in the US. Now, the high schooler group chat is completely inactive. The group chat began losing momentum as CAPE started to lose its popularity, and the high schoolers began undergoing different avenues. Original members of the group chats began phasing out their engagement. Certain teachers became too busy to engage as their school-wide responsibilities changed, and other students either transferred schools, graduated, or moved out of the DFW area. That said, in actively creating a shift in the conversations, both the elders and the high schoolers transformed a lax space into a critical, intense one. The high schoolers creating a group chat specifically as a mode of survival showed a collective appropriation of the state logic of collusion to create disruption. Similarly, the elders' planification of their and others' potential deportation was evidence of intensified immigration enforcement demanding participation from the community to change the culture of an area. A state of terror cannot exist, nor can its effect be legible without fearing individuals in their attempts to subvert its effects on their bodies and their livelihoods. In this way, the state played an invisible hand by enacting laws that propelled this action, then retracting once the community took on a role of self-policing and self-regulation, also known as panoptic fear. Thank you.
So if you guys would like to follow along digitally with the zine that I'm presenting, you guys can go ahead and scan the QR code. Hi, y'all. My name is Jacora Johnson. I am a senior majoring in comparative race and ethnic studies with a minor in African American Africana studies. Yeah, just go ahead and get started. So I know there was like a different title at the beginning of this, but we'll kind of get into that later. But this is a different title. Disrespectability and Deviance, Black Queer Southern Magic for Black Communal Futures. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment for us to remember, honor, and offer our collective condolences to Next Benedict in Torrance, Chevy Hill, two trans siblings taken from their communities far too soon. You are loved, and you will be remembered. We are in a current political moment that seeks to erase the existence of Blackness and queerness, let alone the existence of Black queerness that can be found in these little pockets within the South. Within my work, I focus on Southern, Black, trans, and queer gender nonconforming folk as a site of embodied knowledge. Embodied knowledge meaning knowledge that resides in the body, but also knowledge that is gained through our bodily experiences. I focus on this community, my community, one, due to overrepresentations of whiteness as the predominant narrative of queerness, and two, geographically speaking, both coasts are regarded as these beacons of queer haven, leaving the South within this narrative as this backwards podunk where queerness is expected to die. But there are like little exceptions like Miami or like Atlanta. legacy of this work lies within the 353 total anti-LGBTQ bills proposed by Southern states between 2023 and the couple of months of 2024. Our region of the country is responsible for proposing about a third of the 927 anti-queer legislation within the country. The legislation of the past 14-15 months has sought to restrict everything from students and the rights of educators, healthcare, to civil rights, and the freedom of speech and expression. These bills are a byproduct of a broader cultural wars taking place within the United States, and more specifically, a reflection of conservative values and respectability politics. All right. And while respectability politics has no formal tenets or principles, it is a reflection of dominant society's norms and values that minority groups often mirror, mimic, and assimilate towards. And while it is acknowledged and understood by me that Black communities in particular gravitated towards respectability politics to change and challenge perceptions of Blackness and Black people, more importantly, survival, it's a Black solution to a very white problem. I can understand the violent circumstances that warranted my ancestors to play along with the standards of normalcy in order to protect their loved ones, themselves, and stay alive. However, how does this impact intracommunal intimacies of Black people both back then and now? How could challenging these norms have created a present day of Blackness and Black life that celebrates the innate queerness, both in a non-normative and an identity sense? It's respectability, but at what cost? I think of who and what and where is lost at the expense of Black trans queer people. It is the ways in which we are limiting the beauty and being of Blackness. However, the lived experiences of Southern trans, Black, and queer folks presents us with an alternative. So a term that I kind of theorized or whatever during my research was disrespectability. It is the intentional disruption of social standards of respectability to unearth new possibilities of existence and being. And in the nature of doing my homework and paying homage to the scholars before me, I acknowledge and build off of Brittany Cooper's understanding of disrespectability, which is alluded to and discussed within her book, Beyond Disrespectability, The Intellectual Thought of Race Women, and her essay, Disrespectability Politics, on Jay-Z's Bitch, Beyonce's Fly Ass, and Black Girl Blue. How many working class, everyday Black folks can name a Black, queer, or trans historical figure that isn't Marsha P. Johnson? Cooper references in her book that Pauli Murray was arrested in 1940 for refusing to give up her seat. However, the NAACP refused to take her case because she was queer. What progress was lost as a result of respectability? What could have been gained by venturing into the disrespectable 15 years earlier? James Baldwin has this quote about being African American, and he says it is to be African with no memory, it is to be American with no privilege. The dealings and decisions of our ancestors have a profound impact on how we collectively are shaping, molding, and imagining livable Black futures. To have no memory of who partially constitutes the definition of Blackness as trans, as queer, as gender nonconforming is to continue to perpetuate white supremacy by enacting erasure through homophobia, transphobia. It is not only erasing us in the past, but actively creating a future without us in it. So before we get into the second section, the meat and potatoes of it, I'd like to provide some context. This zine was based off of my research paper, Disrespectability and Deviance, Conversations on Black Queer Gender and Black Communal Futures. However, in the spirit of wanting my work to be accessible and knowing that my community doesn't typically read 30-page academic papers, we have created the zine. During this project, I interviewed a total of 5 Black, trans, and queer folks who lived or currently reside within the South. I ultimately wanted to explore how embodied knowledge contributes to the everyday resistance and contributes towards collective Black liberation by offering different perspectives and understandings of our Black bodies and how we can imagine new ways of living and being with these perspectives. And while I desire for the audience of my work to be Black, I think by embracing and adopting these ways of being as people, we can begin to move beyond the binary in these rigid, visual, ridiculous notions of gender for everybody. The magic of Black, queer, trans disrespectability is most tangibly felt through the embrace of nonconformity, politically, socially, and with our gender, and through the expression of our bodies and beings that is often felt on a more intentional and spiritual level. Rigid outside perceptions of blackness, queerness, and transness often contradict the fluid and complex internal worlds and lives of Black queer trans folks. What happens when these expansive beings in their internal lives are overly simplified, vilified, or misunderstood? What happens when we allow homophobia, transphobia, anti-Blackness, misogyny, to accumulate, ruminate, and dismiss the expression and lives of others? What happens within ourselves when we allow disrespectability to dictate and limit the construction of our own internal worlds and our outward expression? What versions of you, your body, your expression, and your being are lost when you deny yourself authenticity and expansiveness in the favor of conformity? Paige Bradley shares this quote describing their series, Expansion. From the moment we are born, the world tends to have a container already built for us inside. A social security number, a gender, a race, a profession. I ponder if we are more defined by that container than what we are inside. Would we recognize ourselves if we could expand beyond our bodies? Would we still be able to exist if we, would we still be able to exist if we were authentically uncontained? Within the next few pages of the zine are a section of creative prompts and questions to allow you to explore and get curious about who you are in your own internal world beyond your gender. We won't walk through it together today, but it is my offering to community. I want there to be engagement with this work besides me just kind of just talking at you in this moment, and I think we can do all that critical work together. Taking it back to my research project, some of my participants and I, including myself, included creating our own selfless self-portraits, and while we won't walk through them together, I kind of already been encouraged to share my own portrait, and I hope that this will help aid in your own exploration and creativity, inspiring guidance for your own exploration. You're gonna have to just click for a little bit. Yeah, I got you. Keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going. Oh, go back. One more time. Actually, leave it there and I'll just read and you guys can look and all those other good things. Also, shout out to my participants that are here. You know you are. Thank you so much for contributing to this zine, and please go back and look at the hard work that we sat and poured into ourselves into this work. So there's that. My internal world is full of tenderness. It is softness for softness' sakes. It reminds me of who I was when I was little and who I was allowed to be. Little Cora was not bound to the expectations of womanhood or even girlhood for that matter. I was bound to the responsibility of being an oldest child, an eldest who was kind, understood that my brothers and sisters wanted to do everything I did and watched out for them fiercely. The process of recovery after a challenge in my bodily autonomy lives like making my body a good lived experience. I decorate my body like I would a home, adorned with jewels that I like, clothes that are comfy, and riddled with art and words that have been fused with my flesh. This is combined with an understanding that my stubbornness to be alone is much weaker than my innate magnetism to reflect and be blinded by the inner light of those I loved, just as they do for me. That my loving is a hard habit to break, even in the face of my own fears of rejection and yearning to be known, all that naturally accompanies the openness of being vulnerable. The binary exists only onto my body, but outside of it I exist through my soul. And while this existence is grounded in feeling, there is a type of freedom for me that lies within the anarchism and chaos of that fluidity. At the heart of it, it is a hope that my personhood in existence is enough for connection, not because I am feminine, but because I am. My body and my being beyond the binary exists for me as a reflection of my inner world. Can we peek? There we go. So back to the definition, once again, of disrespectability. Give me a second, I gotta click through my own stuff up here. All right. Pulled from the experiences of my participants, I learned that disrespectability could look like, here we go. That disrespectability could look like self-creation, building and being in community, organizing care for one another, non-conformity, and general resistance. But why is disrespectability important? It is a reference to the limitations of normativity and respectability that have required the authenticity of our marginalized selves and bodies to be disposed of in exchange for a mold that our existence wasn't made for. Within the political moment of legislation that directly permits the state to intervene in our lives and in the creation of our bodies for ourselves, human authenticity can no longer be taken for granted. This makes the practice of disrespectability essential as we fight for our lives and their place within the future of the world, both current and imagined. Tony Cade Bambara stated that as a cultural worker who belongs to an oppressed people, my job is to make revolution irresistible. And part of what I hope to be the appeal of disrespectability is the joy that can be embraced and found. I hope that the joy and authenticity is what makes this irresistible, that freedom can be found as a part of what grounds us. But as the title kind of referenced, why are we discussing Black queer joy? I've heard some really unfortunate discourse as of late that says that joy isn't resistance. And I think that this is misfounded. Our joy is never in the absence of our grief or without an awareness of our own struggles. It's not an excuse for an escapism, but an innate compass for liberation. I know what type of world I want to build for myself and my descendants, not only due to my grief, but because of my joy and what it brings me, what allows me to imagine what I want to fill our abolitionist worlds with. Hope and joy are both disciplines. Our natural tendency to lean into the bad, coupled with the circumstances of the world, make despair easy and more susceptible to surrender to. And with that, the last few sections of the zine are offerings of Black queer joy, but in the nature of wanting to share, I want to read something from the book Black Liturgies by Cole Arthur Riley, because she has a bit of kind of like a prayer, I guess, on joy, and I thought it would be really cool to get to share that all with you today, and then I'll wrap it up. And I thought this would be an appropriate one just because we're gathering together for the conference, and I've invited the homies out. The homies, you know who you are. Thank you for showing up. For the table, God of the table. Meet us as we gather, as we recline at the table. Help us to make space to delight in the sacred community we've been given. For the time we're here, let us look up and truly see one another's faces. Protect the comedy of us, the jokes, the playfulness, every smirk, or raised eyebrows, as laughter rings out from us, chairs rocked back, tears in our eyes gasping for breath. Pause time and allow the sacredness of the moment to be realized. Remind us that it's not laughter alone that is the cure, but laughter shared, joy in community, saving our people again and again and again. Keep us from becoming too serious. Let our children watch us delight in each other, tease each other, embrace each other. May this table be a site of memory, passed down from generation to generation, that our children would learn the sound of their own laughter in us right here. Ashe.
Get my instrument. Whoops. Is that how the slides came out? When I started you? Man, not bad. Go to the next one for a second. I just gotta see. Okay, now we show. All right.
Can you let's do this? As I get set up, my name is Ahmed Galo Lopez. I am a PhD student in the History Department at UCLA. I focus mainly on prisons and inmate experiences in Africa, specifically Kenya, but I also do case studies in Mexico, the Caribbean, as well as the US. I also do Europe too. Anywhere there's a prison, I'm always interested to partake in that research. I'm gonna put this right here. This is also my first conference, by the way. This is cool. Okay, cool. All right. I got some new material that we're gonna see how this goes. Before I begin, I want to thank the Kenya National Archives, Fort Jesus Museum faculty, UCLA History Department, my advisors Robin Kelly, Ghislaine Leiden, and Andrew Apter, my Swahili professor Mwalimu Sefrana Chesa, the nonprofit organizations such as Mathari Social Justice, Zero Street Child Foundation, and the Coalition for Grassroots Human Rights Defenders, and all those who I had the privilege of interviewing and getting to know throughout this project. Let's begin. The Prison World, Freedom Papers in 21st Century Kenya. The overview of my presentation will begin with my introduction and topics of research, along with inquiries, my methodology backed by its selected case studies, and finally, concluding thoughts. Kenyan prison systems are great examples of post-colonial effects and governmental surveillance, autocracy, and overall discrimination that have rolled over into the 21st century, bringing a continuation of silenced voices in the marginalized communities of Kenya today. According to the World Prison Brief database, the prison population has increased almost 300% since 1972, with silenced voices being ever prevalent within today's prison population of over 58,800 inmates in Kenya. However, Kenyan prisoners have created spaces, or rather histories, of perseverance, mutual aid, and identity. Since this year's conference explores the broader conversations on movement and migration, I ask the questions: is there movement in the prison system? And if so, how can we study and historicize movement in prisons considering Kenya's longevity of epistemological surveillance and autocratic regimes? What methodologies are available to us, and what new methodologies must we utilize? To answer these questions, I will introduce what I call the prison world, a concept used to interpret archival history within the prison that will help me historicize the lives of inmates through their environment and interactions with guards, other inmates, and the outside world. Interestingly enough, the movement of these inmates and their actions can at times lead them to migrate from prison to prison, thus entering another realm in the prison world. To borrow an idea from historian Nidhi Mahajan, a prison is a world unto itself, a world within a world. Within this world, the experiences and activism of today's Kenyan inmates, including political prisoners, can be expressed through their freedom papers, thus playing a significant role in unsilencing their voices. As mentioned in the introduction, here are the questions I will be working with throughout this presentation. Moving forward with my three methodologies, I will be using the concepts of silenced voices, freedom papers, and the prison world. Before delving into the case studies of prisoners and their carceral experiences, I want to first elaborate on the prison itself and why it acts as not only an institution of power and longevity, but an archive of silenced voices. Silences, according to Haitian historian Michel Rolfe Trio, are often created in the process of historical production. Throughout this process, facts are created from the primary source and given its historicity, after being deemed adequate enough to be incorporated within the archive. Since facts are not created equal in the process, silences, which can be and should be considered facts, are overshadowed and deemed less significant to other sources. Therefore, in order for silenced voices to be recovered or at least acknowledged, they must be given historicity to their greatest extent, no matter how many inaccuracies might exist. Historian Louise White diligently put it, the inaccuracy in these stories make them exceptionally reliable historical sources. They offer historians a way to see the world the way the storytellers did, as a world of vulnerability and unreasonable relationships. History is a culmination of ever-changing stories and testimonies. It is always interpreted and will continue to be interpreted as more sources become present in the archive. But what are these sources when we regard prisoners? Considering that the history of Kenyan prisons are limited in scholarship, I will turn to what I call freedom papers. This concept is defined as the inmate's form of writing that unlocks their spatial entitlement of communication, awareness, and individuality within the prison system. Inspired by political prisoners Kwame Nkrumah, Jomo Kenyatta, Ngugi wa Thiong'o, Maina wa Kenyatta, and Nelson Mandela, freedom papers originated from toilet paper, and it was proven to be more than just a supply for cleaning, but a tool for writing with expression and resilience. It became a freedom paper. It's important to note that although it be its origin and inspiration, toilet paper is just an example for the tools used to create freedom papers, but it does not define freedom papers. To reiterate, freedom papers are inmates' form of writing to self-expression, which can be presented on any platform and material used for writing, and can even be expressed through oral sources, objects, and spaces, as we will see through the case studies. The concept of freedom papers also alludes to what I am currently developing called prison world. The prison world is what I refer to as not only a place, but an archive in itself that can be unveiled through the freedom papers of political prisoners and inmates. To define the first part of this concept, I turn to the prison island of Ustica, where Antonio Gramsci was imprisoned and famously wrote prison notebooks. Based on his experiences as a political prisoner, the island was a space for intellectual thought, self-awareness, and perseverance, which at times felt unreal. Gramsci's imprisonment lasted 11 years, and his cell became his new world until he died in 1937. His life in prison exemplifies how a prison is a specific place or a world that is both existent and non-existent, since prisoners were incarcerated for large periods of time, spending their life temporarily or permanently behind steel bars, fenced gates, and concrete walls to which are no longer associated to the nation that built, facilitated, and controls them. This goes to say the same for many prisoners under colonial occupation and eventually autocratic regimes and systems of power. However, with the power of the governmental sword also comes the power of the imprisoned pen. That brings me back to the second definition of my concept, the prison world as an archive. In the process of historical production, sources are often dismissed in the archive if deemed inadequate and erroneous, which thus produces unheard and silenced voices. This is where the prison world can be recognized as a new archive, or at least reminded of its existence as an unused archive for explicit and uncensored sources. Within the prison is a prison world, and within that world are freedom papers. The selected case studies in this next phase of my presentation explores a history of Kenyan prisons through harsh realities of governmental surveillance, discrimination, and torture, but also triumphant stories of escape, activism, career building, and creativities of expression. Yeah, my bad. I don't know why it looks like that, but I promise you it looked better when I sent it. Temporal landscapes. I begin with my first case study to describe temporality and space in Fort Jesus, Mombasa, built in 1593 as a Portuguese military base. Fort Jesus, a fort built in the shape of a man with 4 bulwarks representing a limb and 8 watchtowers, was formally established as Kenya's first government prison in 1895 under British rule. The fort underwent major renovations, becoming the carceral blueprint for modern-day Kenyan prisons. As you can see, this prison fort included prison warden quarters, barracks for soldiers and guards, kitchens, burial sites, etc., and above all, prison cells for men, women, and children. One feature in particular was located just below the women's cell, and that is the torture chambers, which included 2 rooms. The first room was for both men and women, while the second room behind it was solely meant for men. According to Educational Director of Fort Jesus, Mwalimu Abdi Aden Korio, prisoners would be chained to the walls, while ocean waters would rise up into the chambers and drown the prisoners throughout the night. Poor inmate Muhammad Bachu, who was imprisoned for trading ivory and placed in solitary confinement, developed a communication system through percussive taps against the wall that only he and the other inmates understood. 2 taps and a pause. Followed by a tap meant that a guard was approaching. Continuous taps meant that the chamber was about to flood. 4 consecutive taps would signify that a woman was approaching the chamber. Bachu's use of musical rhythms to communicate with other inmates was a form of esoteric knowledge that developed into mutual aid amongst those held in solitary confinement. This next case study explores the political prisoners of then and now. Former Mau Mau custodian Maina Macharia, who is 92 years old now, exemplifies the political prisoner of the past. While Kenyan Mau Mau revolutionaries mobilized in hopes of decolonization from the British, Maina Macharia was their custodian of important files from 1952 to 1953. His title was short-lived since he was captured and sentenced to 5 years in prison. Along his sentence, Maina moved from prison to prison until he was released in 1959. However, still to this day, he is under government watch for being a dissident against the old government and the current Kenyan government. These 3 pictures showcase his plethora of Mau Mau manuscripts, political manifestos, photographs, and legal documents, which I had the privilege to excavate while I was in Kenya last summer. The next political prisoner is a familiar yet silenced voice in today's prison world of discrimination. Since homosexuality is illegal in Kenya, just like many other parts of the world, being LGBTQ+ creates a risk against law enforcement. Esther, or at least the name that I gave her to protect the confidentiality. A bisexual femme in her boarding school shares how she and her friend were targeted, arrested, and imprisoned. One of my friends, she's a tomboy, a football player. One of the police saw us together, and we were put in Langata prison for 3 months of harassed. The police officer wanted to put her in the other cell with men because Julia Venye alichukua amevaa of what she was wearing. But she was like, no, I am a woman. So the police officer wanted to touch her to feel if she was a woman to confirm. Na feeling kama because tulikuwa LGBTQ ndio maana alifanya hivyo. I feel like we were LGBTQ, and that's why he did that. LGBTQ plus experience countless acts of sexual harassment, and much of it is not only neglected by police, but encouraged. Kenyan police, built on misogynistic and colonial structures, view themselves with omnipotence and interminability. In the case of Esther's friend, she was erroneously viewed as a man, rejected of her identity, and degraded through sexual assault. The last case study brings it all together as we return to the temporality of imprisonment through schedules. While I argue that prisons are places stuck in time, prisoners do abide to strict schedules. According to Colin Zikoyo, a former inmate incarcerated in Nairobi's industrial area remand prison for 2 years, inmates would receive 3 meals per day. At 5 a.m. for breakfast, they would have porridge. At 9 a.m. for lunch, they would have ugali with water. At 12 p.m., which was a bit early for this meal, they had supper. A haragwe, aka beans, and a wali, aka rice, and every now and then, some nyama, aka meat. Between each meal and after supper, inmates were required to work until very late at night during the weekdays. Labor tasks varied from prison to prison, but inmates would work on either the shambas or farms, or work in carpentry, textiles, industry, and partake in minor duties such as kitchen staff and maintenance crew. If tasks were not complete between meals, no meal would be given. Once the day was complete, sleep was no reward either, since each cell, which measured 35 feet by 15 feet, were overcrowded and unsanitary. Considering that there was a lack of medical aid, many inmates would result in critical health from either the food or sleeping conditions. However, while weekdays were dreadful, weekends were more promising. Aside from participating in daily prayer, inmates, based on good behavior and levels of literacy, could access books at the libraries and academic subjects and schools offered on the compounds. Jackson Mwangi Kiko, a former inmate who was imprisoned for 14 years in 3 different prisons, was capable of receiving an education while in prison, and eventually rose to be one of the school teachers. As you can see on the right photo, that is Jackson's CV, with a list of all the subjects he completed, from English to religious education. In addition, according to retired prison officer John Odongo from Kibos Maximum Prison in Kisumu, inmates could partake in other activities such as workshops, sports, choirs, book clubs, Bible studies, arts and crafts, wood carving, games, and of course any skill they acquire from labor tasks was beneficial to them in the near future, especially in means of financial gain. The photographs to the left are wood carvings and textiles made by inmates in various prisons. Each item sold results in a payment to the inmate once they finish their sentence. And I have one of them right here. And interestingly enough, you notice that there are no tusks. That is a symbol because ivory, of course, was exploited throughout East Africa. So all these inmates would do that as a sign of memory, of history, to not forget what the colonists did to the eventual extinction of elephants. These activities, resources, and skill sets were not always available to inmates, however. Depending on their length of sentence, prison they were sent to, the amount of money they were worth before their sentence, ethnic background, sexual orientation, etc., inmates could be categorized with a lower status, hindering them from receiving equal and fair treatment. In conclusion, prisoners are oftentimes disregarded in history because of their presumably hyperbolized testimonies. From their tellings of torture, government surveillance, police brutality, mass incarceration, sexual harassment, discrimination, isolation, starvation, and arduous labor, all encompassing their uncomfortable spaces and endangering encounters within prison walls. What they say can be perceived as untruthful and inaccurate. However, this is how silences are created, and in order for them to be unsilenced, their inaccuracies must be given validity and reliability. We as scholars must be open to their stories and enter their prison world. This presentation introduces a methodology that can be used across spaces and temporalities in history, not just in Africa. Where there is a prison, there is a prison world. And where there is a prison world, there are freedom papers. Only then can we uncover their landscapes, political manifestos, memoirs, educational endeavors, drum rhythms, textiles, wood carving, and testimonies. Only then can we understand how they self-express decolonization, social justice, LGBTQ activism, feminism, and freedom of expression. For the prison world is not only a place, but an archive for us to listen to. Thank you very much.
All right, those were amazing to listen to. Truly, you guys all did a wonderful job. So I want to thank you all for all of the work put into this. I have like one grounding question for the panel, and then we'll open it up to Q&A. So I hate to be this person. I hate going to conferences and people giving me this long-winded, not question, but they say it's a question. I'm about to do that, but hopefully in a better way. Because I just want you guys to reflect more on this, and you can pick out any part of what I say, because I think all of your work is like really important and kind of touches on this. So I was just wondering if you guys could reflect on, I think you all did a great job kind of like illuminating some of the responses to the enduring coloniality that we all live under. And I think, I just want to hear a little bit more these responses to coloniality, to the colonial gaze, right, as a form of refusal that I kind of saw in like each of your work. And this refusal is also like a refusal I've been thinking about, not as just refusal to, like direct refusal to coloniality, but refusal to also be defined by coloniality, and like returning to ourselves and our communities, which all of you kind of talked about that in different ways, to put forth these forms of refusals as resistance through communal channels, sort of. And it kind of just had me thinking about the term existence is resistance, and I think it's been co-opted a little bit, a lot of it, by a lot of neoliberal forces, and so I think all of your work did a great job kind of reframing around that and reclaiming it from those forces, I think, beyond, right, like the neoliberal DEI framework of that. So if you all want to reflect on any part of what I just said, because it was one of those not a questions, but yeah, I'm thinking about refusal and that term also, existence is resistance. So any reflections on that? You can really take it wherever you want.
Okay. I guess I'll try to answer it. Man, I work with inmates, man. It's a privilege to do that, and I get to see all the different ways they resist, whether that be the government, whether that be people who are discriminatory towards them, or for the most part, make them feel less accepted. And one of the things that I have learned is that many inmates speak their own languages so that the guards cannot understand. The language in Kenya is supposed to be Swahili, but it is English and Swahili. Why English? Because of British colonization. And I want to reference Ngugi wa Thiong'o's Decolonizing the Mind. Ngugi wa Thiong'o was a huge activist and advocate for speaking your own language and staying with that. He writes all his playwrights, and for the most part, does a lot of his lectures in Gikuyu. And that's something that I can say is a refusal to the coloniality of these spaces, is that don't forget where your roots are, don't forget where you come from, stick to who you are, and keep fighting for that. And these are what these inmates do. This is how they communicate with one another. They created drum circles so that the British guards won't understand what the heck is going on. But they were able to understand that. We call that esoteric knowledge. So that's one example I can bring up.
I want to reflect on existence as resistance, because obviously we all know existence is not resistance. And to give a little context into my project, I made it a point to make a clear divide between documented and undocumented citizens, residents, individuals being involved in these conversations. I like the point that you made about language. So for the WhatsApp, the elders group chat, most, if not all of them, in the group chats were undocumented, and they used Spanish because they were all from Latin American countries. Latin American people in the US are also known as one of the most resisting forces because of the refusal to learn English. Most, not all. In terms of the high schooler group chat, they were all using English not just because they were mostly descendants of immigrants, descendants of Latin American parents, grandparents. They were also in a space where they were forced to speak English to communicate with the teachers and staff that were helping them equip with better resources. And so in reflecting on existence as resistance, existence is not resistance because you have, one, the divide with the language, but you also have something that I explore further in my paper about undocumented immigrants. At the Texas-Mexico border and the southern border in general, there's a widespread practice of informants, and a lot of those informants are undocumented immigrants. And I think it goes back with the logic of not all skinfolk are kinfolk. Not all undocumented immigrants, would support the things that I was talking about in these group chats. They would not all be willing to resist in the same ways that these individuals resisted through that digital medium, or they would just not be willing to resist at all. And I'll leave it at that. Issues with generalization is basically it.
I have to disagree with you there a little bit. Not on your own research, just like from my own perspective. I think when we take into consideration the legislation that's happening, when I take into consideration historically, the history of Black people, of Black bodies, I'm not supposed to be here. I'm not supposed to be here at TCU, I'm not supposed to be here on the stage, we're not supposed to be here. And I think for Black queer folks, my existence is resistance. I would say me taking a breath is a reminder that I'm alive, and that is just it, full stop. But me getting to exist in the spaces that I am is a little bit of a form of resistance, and that's not it. Like I said earlier, full stop. But that's just a slight caveat there to answer that part of the reflection. And then there is a Texas-born gender advocate by the name of Alok. And they are on an episode of, Homegirl from Orange is the New Black, who's really dope. Her name's escaping me at the moment. They do a podcast episode where they're talking about being non-binary, the sort of movement of that taking place, and Alok, they talk about it being a movement to come back to one's self. It is a movement not to abolish gender, but a movement to sort of become oneself truly outside of these understandings and constructs of gender and of identity in that way. So I think that's what I thought of when you were talking about coloniality, resisting, and nonconformity and all those sorts of things.
Yeah. So I wanted to respond about language because I know that was something that has been brought up. But when I created my zine and just started my research, my biggest barrier was I was at a predominantly white institution, and I was learning all of these new things for the very first time, and it made me feel very insecure about the spaces that I was entering. And so that's when I was like, well, where's the work, where's the research, where's the content, not just readings, but content for folks that look like me and that talk like me. And then shout out to Dr. Carmen Kennard, I love her. She exposed me to Ebonics as Resistance by Charles Green and Ian Isidore Smart, where they talk about a specific part where they talk about, I think in 1996 in Oakland, California, where the district wanted to work towards considering Black students as bilingual because they speak Black English, not standard American English, which is very, very different. And so when I was creating these zines, I was like, okay, well, if I look at myself as bilingual, speaking standard English and Black English, and I'm entering these standard English spaces, well, then I have to create a zine that sounds just like me, that has a little bit of academic writing, but also, you know, that sounds like me as a person. And so throughout the zines in the collection, there's parts where it's very academic. It's giving you like citations and all that good stuff, but then it's also giving you like definitions and like also giving you just like things that I heard growing up as a kid and things that make sense for me, and then pictures and videos and content that showed like this, that just because it's on YouTube or on Instagram or whatever does not mean that it's not valid and that it's not justified. And that my research itself is a form of resistance, and that it refuses to be traditional in just writing a 26-page paper with an introduction and a literature review and X, Y, and Z, and I can say that it can all sit on the same page.
So we'll open it up to Q&A.
Hi all, love the research. I have a ton of questions, but I've narrowed it down to 3. So, as an undergrad, we aren't normally thinking of research, conferences, and especially as first gen, we aren't thinking about this. So, how did y'all come to y'all's research topics, and can y'all shine a light on the research process? And that's kind of like a 2-parter from. The last question is, do y'all ever think that TCU or at large higher education institutions will never not be a source of colonial violence happening in perpetuity?
No, to answer your question. I went to NWSA, National Women's Studies Association in Baltimore back in like October, and they had like these sticky notes, like you could like put one on the board and like take one, and then on one I had seen like a phrase I hadn't seen before. It was like abolish the academy, and I was like, oh fuck yeah, because I think to myself like, I really enjoy the process of learning and learning about communities and learning about the world around me. Like my mom and my siblings always talk about how I always have like a book in my backpack, and I always have another one backup just in case I finish it. And I enjoy like the process of like having that curiosity and being able to share that curiosity with other people. And academia, unfortunately, in some spaces, like not even spaces, because fuck that, it's individuals, individual professors, individual programs, shout out Dr. McCormick, who like nurture that in individuals and nurture that in students, but institutions as a whole like do the whole business game of like, okay, here's a 30-page research paper, here's a language that you have to use. Like, we all know who Bell Hooks is, and All About Love has been all the rage amongst all the communities over the past couple of years. And like academics don't, like there are some academics who think her writing is too commonplace to be considered any type of source of like knowledge to be validated within these walls. So no, to that second question. And then to the first one about like processes of like research, I think like for me, I came to my research topic because I knew Black folks, Black queer folks were here in Texas. I knew that they were here in the South. And it was hard for me to see something or see anyone that wasn't like a size 2, excuse my vernacular, twink, as this sort of like representation of like queerness. And it was like, where am I at? Like, I know we around here, I'm not the only black queer for like 100 miles, like don't do that to me. And like I wanted to be able to see myself, so I was like, I'm gonna set this up structurally, so when I come to this school, I'm gonna make my priority to find those people, and to interview them, and to like create something that felt like a bit of like a love letter to us, for us. So that's how I came to the topic of that. And then the second prong about like the process of it, process of research is hell. It's a lot of like, some of it is fun. It's like I'm reading, and then I'm thinking, and then I'm reading, and then I'm thinking. And that's like a privilege to be able to do, right? But like parts of it are fun, and then you've got to do like a literature review, which is, but yeah, that's kind of
I will also start with the second question. No. I agree with a lot of what you said. I think you articulated it very well. I think something it reminded me of was, I'm looking at your laptop and we all have the stickers, and I don't fully blame all of us, but say decolonize your syllabus. There's nothing decolonial about a syllabus. If you're wanting to remove coloniality from it altogether, then why do you have a syllabus at all? Just don't be in an institution like this. That's what I say about that. Second thing, or to your first question, in terms of the process, I think it was just always very personal to me. A lot of what I covered in this and the fuller paper is how border rhetorics carry on into the interior. I grew up in the US-Mexico border, and I saw the impacts of those border rhetorics at the border when I lived in Mexico, when I lived in the US, and then I saw when I came to DFW. And so that's kind of how I was inspired to do this. In terms of the process, I'm still very much in the process. Finding a community is not just about, I want to analyze this community, let me go in there, extract some data, do some literature reviews, connect it, and that's that. It was more so that the research found me. I was in the community, I already had these ideas. I didn't have terms like, for example, panoptic theory, self-formulated theory, but I also didn't have terms like the panopticon itself. And so, again, it was more the research found me, and then I just coined terms and gathered other terms to be able to articulate what I was seeing. And I'll leave it at that. Yeah.
Hi again. Okay, so to answer the question, I guess my research process was very much more like, or let me phrase it like this. The way that I took research was as a way for me to get the things I needed being here. So I didn't do research because I wanted to. I definitely did not. And I'm a writing major, and so when I got here, and I was like, oh, I'm in the honors college too, y'all. So let me give y'all some tea. So in the honors college, specifically for like writing majors, what they say is research is, okay, you write yourself a little poetry collection, a little novella, a novel, a couple chapters of a book, whatever. And I was like, that's not research. And I said, and I need to do research so I can make some money. That's it, because I'm trying to get scholarships, I'm trying to get opportunities, and those were the things I needed just to get through my undergrad. So that went from the Gilman Scholarship or McNair, if you're familiar with those things. But in order for me to get those things, I decided to do research. So then my question was like, well then how do people even do research as a writer? I don't know, what am I supposed to write? Like about my own poetry? Like, or research about? I didn't know. So then that was when I like started to like learn about autoethnography and learning about rhetoric. And rhetoric is my bread and butter, y'all, I love it. And so I started exposing myself to Black rhetoric and Black language. And with that, I learned how I was able to like use both my creative works as a poet along with research, and then also using myself as the subject to research myself. And so, but in order to like get through that process, I actually had to utilize the classes I was taking, almost all of my classes. Dr. McCormick, Dr. Mack, Dr. Romero, they know what I'm talking about. Most of my time in their classes would contribute to my own research because I didn't have time to just work on other projects. So I would always contribute that knowledge back into my research because I didn't want to waste time. And then that also included my
what was supposed to be a year-long study abroad experience that turned into only 4.5 months. That I also had to take into consideration when it came to like my process and how I decided to document my entire experience from TCU to study abroad to my return. So all of that being said, I was just trying to do research so I can really figure out what I wanted to do with my life, and here I am. So.
Yeah, it's a privilege to be with y'all. I don't know who planned this panel, but it really fits. To answer your first question, I've been working with inmates since I was 15. If y'all don't know, Homeboy Industries, it's the largest gang prevention and rehabilitation center in the world. It's located in Los Angeles. And I've been working with gang members, gang-related families, children of those gang members. Right now I'm a scoutmaster of those kids in scouting, and it's just, that has inspired me. Like I said, I want to do something with this. I just want to expand on this, but how do I do it? Well, school is always my safe place, so I just stayed and entered the PhD program. But why Africa? Why Kenya? Why not just stick with the US? I mean, that just really happened by chance. I was doing my BA in Renaissance history and I got bored. So then I took my first class in African history. It was the best thing I could have ever done, because it was like being a kid in a candy shop. I had no idea what to expect. I didn't know anything about it. I still don't know anything about it, people. It's a humbling experience. Oral sources, oral history is one of the greatest methodologies in our human history. Why? Because it is a methodology that continues to breathe and stay alive. And I see the inmates, the ethnographical research I do with them in Kenya, and I know I'm just excited to see what else I have in store for that, and what they have in store for me. I mean, to get into the, it kind of answers the second question as well. I'm a very unorthodox guy. I don't really like going by the syllabus. I'm a jazz player, and if y'all don't know what jazz is, it's you learn the rules so then you can break them. And that's what we do in academia too. You know, we're very, very improvisational, but with good intention. One of the methodologies I was able to bring today was music, and being able to just bring music. Even percussion in Africa is an oral source. That's oral tradition. It is a language that is a universal language. You can be from any part of the world and you will understand what it feels to be in that moment when music is playing. And that's something I was able to learn, especially amongst the inmates. One time I went to go visit this circle in Mathare, which is a slum community in Kenya. And I brought my guitar, man. I'm Mexican. I'm thinking, I'm gonna bring music. I'm gonna play some mariachi. That's what I did. I played some mariachi, was thinking, yo, I'm not black, okay? I'm Mexican. So I ended up just playing mariachi, and they start bringing in their percussions, instruments, and I'm thinking, oh, shit's about to get down. I have no idea what we're making, but something's gonna happen. And that was the moment I realized this is exactly where I want to be. I love doing this. I want to continue doing this and just expanding on these different ways to go about this research, where it's not just on a piece of paper, it's not just on a book. You know, we read books every day, but sometimes you got to put the book down and write your own story, because that's exactly what these inmates are doing every single day when they're sharing their lives in a cell.
So I want to just start by saying, that was like one of the best panels I've seen.
Oh,
Like, and I've been doing this for like 25 years, so props, y'all. I also wanted to say, Alexis, I can totally hear canard in your in the way you talk and the way you think, but you're going in your own directions, which is awesome. So I was like texting her, I was like, "You're getting a shout out from Alexis Davis right now." But I love that when the mentors, right, can give you resources that you then just take in to your own path, and so it's wonderful. I'm going to do the same thing. It's okay. I'm just going to do it. So real quick, so Pamela, I wanted to say, when you're ready for PhD programs, UT Austin is a great place to study surveillance. So I don't know if you thought about that or you're thinking about that.
Look, I'm ready for a PhD program. Unfortunately, I chose sociology, but I dive in rhetoric, so whenever you want to work with me, I'm ready.
Right. Good to know. Right on. So the question I actually have, the question, this is, again, amazing presentations. I love the juxtaposition of Jacora and Alexis' talk. Like, you're engaging with really resonant subject matter in, I think, different ways. And I wonder, what are the conversations you see with one another? Like, are you in conversation? Is this your first conversation? Like, how are you sparking together?
It's kind of funny that you like see your work within conversation, and the reason why, like, I forgot who made the comment earlier about like the panel working really well. It works well because all three of us know each other. And like during the grad application process last fall, it was us camping out in Sadler, staying up all night and being like, hey, give me a second. Does this make sense? Like, let me explain this to you and then let's run it back. No, you should do it like this. And us like literally workshopping together. And I think one thing that was really helpful, like thinking through things and kind of brings into that conversation piece that you were talking about, how Alexis mentioned social death within the beginning of her work, and how I've been thinking through like disposability of like Black queer trans folks like in the South. Those were like different ways that we were kind of like in conversation with one another and attempting to like make sense of it.
I would also say like we were also in conversations when we were making our zines, because the way that we approach our zines are different, and just our visual styles are different as well. But like when we talk about just Blackness and then all the nuances in our research, I think it allowed us to really figure out like what is it that we actually want to say, how to say it, but also like from one Black person to another. Are you understanding what I'm saying? No. Like when I say this, do you actually know what I'm saying? Like, are we speaking the same language right now? Because I'm trying to make sure I'm communicating with you. And I feel like that was very important, especially in those conversations, so that we can still have like visual pieces that are still beautiful, but still we're able to connect with, whether I'm looking at theirs or they're looking at mine.
So I love the panel. I know all of y'all personally, so it's so nice to hear y'all's research because I haven't had the chance to hear it. But I guess because I'm taking Poems of the Caribbean with Dr. Chetri. Yes, it's a great class. I love it. I just got out of it actually. And we're talking about this idea of nation language. That was one of the themes within, I think, Wolcott's poem that we went over. So I just want to, mainly for Alexis, because you're talking about the ideals of speaking AAVE or Ebonics versus speaking standard English. And just for everyone on the panel, what do you think is the most important aspect of speaking the English, or like speaking the language that Black people or people of color have built in these colonized countries? Like, what do you think is the most important aspect of keeping that root alive within society and not letting people think that it's improper?
Wow. Sorry, give me one second. One thing, I'll speak for myself. So like, one of the biggest things that I changed in my writing as a poet was that I started using Black English within my poetry.
In Dr. Carmen Kennard's class, Black Rhetoric and Language, take it if you can, we talked a lot about like the grammatical rules or non-rules of Black English. I don't remember who said it, but was saying like, know the rules so you can learn how to break them. And I've known the rules since I've been in school. And so I saw that as an opportunity to finally break those rules. And what I'll say is that like being able to actually use my own language in my writing made it more personable and allowed me to not only connect with myself, but connect with other people. Because my research is for others, but it was also very much a healing journey for me because I endured a lot while I was studying abroad, and I had to figure out how to really cope with that. So what I will say is that like, what your core had brought up, like being a part of a socially dead community, just being Black and not having a language sometimes, or having to adopt a language, or just even having to create something for ourselves, that is what I find as important, because I'm still reclaiming Black literary traditions while also creating something of my own and something that I can pass down. Because from this point on, whatever I create will be in community knowledge, and it will always contribute to knowledge, meaning that I'm creating something out of almost nothing. So, anyone else?
When I was thinking about like your question, I think of like people being able to create like a language within a language is like a marker of resistance. It means that like, oh, okay, like sure you've imposed this way upon me, but girl anyway, and like you're remixing it. Like, and I think about like, and it's not in language, but it's like another example of it. I hope I'm saying this right, I learned it in my Understanding Black Religions class, the Santeria. And like Cuba, and like you have like these enslaved African folks who've been able to take this religion and like remix it. And I honestly think that like there's nothing more Black than just taking something and being like, yeah, like how can I remix it? Like you gave me like lemons and I made lemonade, for real, for real. And I think when I was thinking about your question specifically to language, I think about like Black queer language and like Black queer slang and how all the girlies are like, period, and slay, and like, we did that. What's that Drake means? And we did this, we did all of this. That's what I think of. And there's like a portion of like the zine toward the end, and there's this really, really beautiful documentary about truly the pioneer of rock and roll, Little Richard, and it's called the documentary is called I Am Everything, and in the beginning of it he says, I am the originator, I am the architect. And like, I think one, it's important for like preservation and like being able to have like that literal living, breathing resistance, but like also like to know that like you made something new out of something that was never meant for any part of you to survive, and to know that you can like embed that like is just, yeah. But
even when we look across the diaspora, that's been the reality. We learned about Guyana, in Guyana the English is spoken differently.
Yeah.
It's spoken with like Indo-Guyanese and like all it's like spoken within the way that African people have interpreted it.
yeah.
One thing I do recommend, and the reason why I brought up Black literary traditions, I recommend reading, Black Feminist Thought by Patricia Collins, but more specifically look into the first chapter, because that's when she's talking about reclaiming, and that's a lot of what we're doing. Like creating zines is a form of reclaiming, because it's an archive is meant to collect, it's meant to savor, and so that moving forward, our descendants can still look back. So I would say, like, if anything, really think about what reclaiming means to you.
Hello. I have two questions, one specifically for Pamela and then one for everyone else. Pamela, in your research presentation, it was centered around communication apps, and I was wondering if there were other mediums that you saw were also affected by surveillance or that you used to document the panoptic fear that were not in your presentation.
Yes, they're not in the paper either way. I will say I did struggle a lot with gathering information from these two mediums just because I hate both Kik and WhatsApp for deleting everything after you delete an app or log out. Right.
Like that 64-digit code?
Yes. Right, that. So I'm cursing Facebook right now because they own both of them. But I say that to say there was a time when I was exploring phone calls, and it wasn't really the phone calls itself. They obviously were not recorded, but when the shift started happening, a lot of, at least the elders, started talking about how they would call back home, whether that was Mexico, Central American, South American countries, and even the high schoolers, most of the students would call their parents because they didn't want anything to be seen through messages. They didn't want that digital footprint to remain there and, you know, be used in being upheld in court and things like that. That became increasingly difficult because even though the things that I gathered for the Kik and WhatsApp groups were by word of mouth and relying on the memory of the families and the students, I stepped away from that. So originally tried it with phone calls, became increasingly difficult, and then that's when I resorted to Kik and WhatsApp. And I did have a lot more memory about that. Some people even had screenshots, and it was just more fruitful than relying on those video calls. But a large part why they moved away from the phone calls was also that a lot of things were lost in translation as they were talking to each other. And so having things in writing was also an easier way to get clarification on, for example, students telling their parents about this is what this new law means, this is what Title 42, Title 8, and things like that meant. And I hope that answers your question.
And for everyone, and I think you all already kind of slowly answered this question. Sorry, before the question, I just wanted to say y'all are giving me so much food for thought on language and everything that you were sharing. It made me think of like people who start using Spanglish and how they start changing that, and then recently meeting diverse cultures who also have their version of that within their own languages, and yeah, we're like, fuck English. Everyone answered no to the academia never not being oppressive or limiting, I think was the question. And my question is, if you could imagine or dream up what an alternative would be to having an affirming, truly inclusive and liberating education and wisdom sharing, or even any small steps towards that, what would that look like?
So, the individual who just asked this amazing question and the people sitting there at that table are a part of an amazing organization in Fort Worth called United Fort Worth. And I think, give them their props, give them their props. I think in part of what that looks like part of the work that like we're already doing in community with each other. Like they have this amazing program that they do every summer called Freedom School, and I think us really being able to take charge of like what our knowledge like looks like, being like, oh, let's like read a book and sit around together and like digest and dissect this together, truly for the aspect of learning rather than for any type of like accreditation or degree or like props or clout or whatever, like learning for learning's sake, learning for empathy's sake, for real. And like that looks like what we're doing now. And I know that's not the most like imaginative, but like I think it works. Like I was talking to Rupa, Dr. Cod, earlier today, and like I was thinking about my own personal stuff, and they had mentioned that like part of the work that I want to do in this world is stuff that I'm already doing now. And being able to like host like little talks and stuff in the backyard with y'all and things like that are what that looks like. It's learning for learning's sake, it's learning for joy's sake, and like really tapping into that curiosity without it having to like mean any sort of like hierarchical authority. And another thing, and this might be a bit more imaginative, is tapping into different types of knowledge. Like there are several things I could do PowerPoints on, you can really get me on a soapbox about, but I hate the way our society is structured to value things like STEM and mathematics and things of that sort more than qualitative knowledge, or more than like subjective types of knowledge. Like it's this obsession with like things needing to be like measured and exact versus tapping into things, really tapping into the true potential of things that are just like subjective. Like I think that's part of the reason why I really enjoyed like doing the zine and doing it the way I do, is because that can't be measured. That's gonna vary from black queer person to black queer person. And some folks might, feel a type of way about, oh, this can't be measured. It's not so rigid, and it allows for like a bigger, beautiful fluidity that isn't like 1 + 1 = 2. But also, like, I'm not a math gay, so that might be my bias, but whatever.
I just want to point out that nothing in Jacora's all-inclusive imagination reality involved the academy. So I don't know if you were asking in general context or in the context of the academy. If we're talking about the academy, I don't think that's ever going to happen. And I think with the colonial answer that was asked over here, we all kind of got to that. Now, if we want to do something about being all-inclusive within the academy, I think it's more about dismantling, not reconfiguring, which we have seen, at least in the context of TCU, happening. You used the 150th as an example of that, but that's how I'll say about that.
I guess I will say something that Jacora had already pointed out was that like everything is not like just in a book. Sorry, can you hear me? Yeah. Everything is not just in a book, and one thing a mentor had said to me, especially just like in rhetoric, was like, if all I'm giving you is books, what are y'all actually learning? Like, there is so much more for you to be exposed to. There are things that you're exposed to. Of course it's Carmen. Who else? I love her. And she was like, there is so much more that for you to not only teach yourself, but to teach others. And like one thing that I very much enjoyed, and I've talked about it with them many times, is that like, just in like even presentations, like having the ability to teach what I want to teach. Like having that space, maybe it's that one class in Dr. Kennard's class where she's like, okay, it's your presentation, but I got to teach about a hip hop group that I love and that is amazing and I enjoy. But that was a moment where I actually got to teach something that I wanted to do, not something that was just required. But it was something that I was passionate about, which I also will align with Jacora as well. Like being able to actually talk about what you're passionate about, teach what you're passionate about, and connect with other people that are also passionate about those things. I enjoy that. But to also add on, like the first thing when you asked that question was that I just thought about home. Like the first place where you will learn is always at home. And even though, like, even as we go back to our parents with the knowledge that we get from here, we're still learning, and so are they. And so that's how I look at knowledge and education. Is like, I'm always going home, and I'm always learning something there, and I'm always bringing something back to contribute to that as well.
We're all TAs, or at least a lot of us are. Like, some of us, I mean, oh, my bad, okay. Well, you know what? That just means I think really highly of y'all. You will be.
I'm sorry, that's indicative of other things.
Well, I mean, in the end, I love the way you guys think, and in the end, all the ideologies that you're bringing up is just fueling what I'm going to be doing eventually with my research as well. But considering that I guess I'm the only PhD student, I'm a TA. So it can be daunting at times when you hear, hear me out, when you hear other TAs talk badly about students. That's screwed up, man. But y'all are undergrads. You have your TAs. Sometimes your TAs aren't that great. Sometimes they make you feel bad. As a TA, I'm sorry for that. But it also starts with, the teacher too. Like I love history because I had that one great teacher. I had that one amazing high school teacher who showed me that history is just a walk on humanity. And after that, I'm thinking, man, that is the best thing you could have ever told me, because I didn't know what I was going to do with my life. So now I'm going to start thinking about history. And it is a walk of life. And you go into the classroom with the attitude that other people might absorb. If it's a good attitude, you're setting a very good impression. If you're coming in with a bad attitude, then why are you there? It's just teach because you love it, not because you have to. And it's obviously, there's a long way to go to change the system of academia, but it starts with bringing the impression in the classroom, bringing a good attitude. And then another thing is, with curriculum,
Man, I love performance. Like, performance is so great because it allows you to do whatever you want that resonates with you. I'm TAing for a class next quarter with a professor named Teofilo Ruiz on witchcraft, mystics, and the arts of medieval, I don't know where, but medieval something. But in the end, the final, they have a choice. They can either write a paper or do a performance. Man, I love the performances because it can be anything. It can anything that resembles the material, but at the end of the day, resonates for who you are. I was an undergrad, I did my BA, my MA, and now I'm doing my PhD at UCLA. So I kind of got to see what it was like to be a student and be a TA who's still a student, even amongst my students. But more importantly, being able to see what I was able to do and also what they're able to do and share those different experiences, have a common ground. And performance is just a great example of how we can bring other people's way to self-express themselves. Oh, that's okay. To express themselves.